my name is Ayla tesler-mabe, and today I am going to be showing you how to play and master bar chords, because you can get a lot done with these wonderful cowboy chords here, which are usually the first chords we all learn when we're starting to play the guitar. But at a certain point, you might notice that you can't play certain songs with only open chords. So with bar chords, you're able to play any song you'd like to, and also you'll be able to find shapes that you can move around the neck very easily. And unlike with these open cowboy chords, you don't have to learn a different chord for every letter name, like G, G sharp, A. As you see here, I'm using the same shape for all of those chords. So I always like teaching things in a real-life musical context. So I'm going to show you a chord progression that's been used in hundreds of songs over the years. It's the 6-4-1-5 chord progression. You might recognize it from songs such as Africa by Toto or Peace of Mind by Boston and numerous other pop and rock hits. And it sounds like this. And the beauty of this chord progression is you actually only need to know two chord shapes. Before we get into the chord shapes themselves, I think the first and most important thing you can do when trying to figure out where to play a bar chord is to find its root note. And the root note is the starting note of the chord. So for example, the first chord of this chord progression I played is a B minor chord. So you might not even know what the minor part of B minor is referring to, but the only thing you really need to be paying attention to at this point is the B part in B minor, because that's going to let you know what note you should be starting this chord shape from. First step is let's find B. And we're going to play all of these chords on the low E string for now, just so we can keep things simple. If I want to find B, you might know that it's right here at the 7th fret. But let's say you didn't know. Easy trick. Just start with what you do know, which is the open E string. This is E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B. That is the note we were looking for. And now what we need to do is build our minor bar chord shape. And so the first thing you need to do is take your index finger, lie it flat across the strings. And our first goal is going to be to have all of these notes ring out just like that. The most challenging part is being able to have all of the strings ring out while also keeping your hand relaxed. You shouldn't have to feel like you're strangling the neck at all. And a lot of that has to do with the angle that your finger is actually at in terms of how you're placing it on the strings. So a lot of people have the inclination to keep everything at a perfect 90-degree angle like this. And immediately when I do this, I feel tension all throughout the back of my thumb and my wrist here. The first thing I want to do actually is bring my elbow in, and I'm not actually going to be making perfect contact just with the bottom of my finger here. I'm actually sort of going to be using the side like this. So instead of just laying my finger flat, it's actually at a little bit of an angle, if you see here like this. Because if you try to lay your finger completely flat like this, you're going to end up kind of hyperextending your joints here, which is one of the reasons you'd probably feel so much tension and also end up not being able to apply quite enough pressure for all of the strings to ring out. So it's for that reason that I highly recommend sort of angling your finger the way I recommended. And if you look closely here, again, sort of the side of my finger that is making contact like this. And my thumb is just sort of resting casually on the back of the neck like this. You don't have to do anything crazy with your thumb. You don't need to totally hyperextend backwards either. Just try to keep everything as relaxed as you can. Just like that. And again, if you are noticing certain strings are a little buzzy, that just means you're not quite putting enough pressure. And so as you go through strings one by one, you should be able to identify what those problem notes are, and then try to adjust your finger accordingly. The first exercise I want to give you is taking this bar and just moving it around the neck. And let's actually take a quick moment to identify what the other root notes of this chord progression are, because then we can start moving just this bar around. And obviously you can hear that doesn't quite sound like the song yet, but we'll get there. The first thing you want to do is start, of course, the 7th fret, because B is our first chord, B minor. And our second chord is G major, which is down here at the 3rd fret. So that's where I'm putting my next bar. And then the next chord is D major, which is all the way up here at the 10th fret. And then A major, here at the 5th fret. And so what you can do, if you're not quite at the stage where you can just strum through the whole chord and have all the strings ring out, I would highly recommend going through one at a time, because again, you'll be able to identify the problem strings. Like for example, my high E string did not ring out the way I wanted it to, so I could try to adjust that. There we go. And a lot of this process of building muscle memory comes down to mindfulness, actually. When it sounds good, pay attention to what that feels like. If it sounds not so good, pay attention to what that feels like and try to not do that again and correct yourself. And it's just a process of, trying and practicing. And I think that's where that saying, practice makes perfect, comes from. For better or for worse, the more you practice, the more easily you'll be able to identify what is or isn't working in your technique. And hopefully you can try some of the tips I gave you to see if that helps at all. So the official exercise will be to take this bar and move it and play through each of the strings one at a time. Here at the 7th fret, 3rd fret, 10th fret, 5th fret. And once you can do that comfortably, that's where I would recommend just strumming through all the strings. So you can get a feel for what it feels like to bar across the neck like this. The next step is to turn these bars into full-on bar chords. And like I said, the first bar chord is B minor. So here we are barring at the 7th fret, because again, that's our root B. Now what you need to do is take your 3rd finger here, put it at the 9th fret of the A string, your pinky here at the 9th fret of the D string. That is your minor bar chord shape, which you can actually move all around the neck to play any type of minor chord, as long as you start from the right root note. Like, here's B minor, B flat minor, A flat minor, G minor. As you can see, this is all the same shape. And now, the good news is you only need to learn one more shape to play through this chord progression, and that is the major chord shape, because the rest of the chords are all major chords. So, G major. Again, we're down here at the 3rd fret, we're barring across all the strings. Now, to turn it into a major chord, first you can actually build a minor chord. Just like before, here I'm putting my 3rd finger at the 5th fret of the A string, pinky at the 5th fret of the D string, and lastly, I'm going to be putting my middle finger here on the 4th fret of the G. Just like that. And for those of you who are a little bit familiar with music theory, that's essentially just taking the minor third and raising it by a semitone, therefore turning it into a major third. So there's minor, major. To play these last two chords, D major, A major, all you have to do is move this wonderful shape up here to the 10th fret, because there's our root D, and then here's our root A, therefore this is an A major shape. And now we know how to play this chord progression. And the reason it's awesome to be able to play this chord progression is because it can actually serve as an exercise that you can play in repetition with the intention of mastering your bar chord shapes. Because if you can play this chord progression, you have essentially mastered major and minor bar chords, and that's a great thing. So what I would do is just practice this in repetition. And so I played it very slowly there in time, but you can even start by playing this out of time and just seeing if you can get from one shape to the next. So I'm starting here, B minor, and I'd actually recommend starting with that exercise where you go through one string at a time, just to make sure every string is ringing out exactly the way you want it to, and then you can play the whole chord. And then when you move to the next chord, again, I'd start with playing each string one at a time, just to make sure everything is sounding as it should. And then, when everything is ringing out, you can strum through the whole chord. And then let's say you encounter a string that isn't ringing out, like that. You can say, okay, well that's the G string. I can see that's what my middle finger is supposed to be covering. Clearly I'm not putting quite enough pressure, so let me try to adjust that. Okay, here I can see it's a little bit too close to the fret, and I think that's why it's buzzing. So let me try moving it back a little bit, putting a little more pressure. There we go. So now I can play through all the strings. I hear that everything is ringing out as it should, so I'll strum through the chord. And then once you can do that for all of the chords, then you can try playing through the whole chord progression slowly in time. And as I'm playing through this, I'm always thinking about the next chord I'm going to, because that is a great habit to get into. So once I'm on this B minor chord, I'm already thinking about the G major chord I'm going to next at the 3rd fret. And when I'm at this chord, I'm already thinking about the D major chord at the 10th fret. I'm already thinking about the A major chord here at the 5th fret. And if you start very slowly, and you start thinking through that as you're playing very slowly, you're going to start building these habits, so you can even do that in real time when you're playing it at a faster speed. So there you go. So that's an exercise that you can use to practice and play through your bar chords. And before I wrap up, I want to point out a few other trouble points that people often run into. The first is not having your fingers sort of upright enough. Like if I have my fingers flattened like this, it's really hard to not cover the strings below, which is obviously what you're trying to avoid. So I'm actually approaching, again, sort of from above almost. Like if you're playing piano, you wouldn't have your fingers flattened like this. You'd have them sort of at an angle where you're approaching from the fingertip, especially for these fingers that you're adding to the bar. Again, approaching with the fingertip as opposed to flatten like this. Another thing to pay attention to, a lot of people run into trouble with the G string when they're playing minor bar chords, because unlike major bar chords where you have that covered by a finger like this, here, this is usually the string that doesn't have quite enough pressure. So this is again where I'd really pay attention to having my finger sort of rotated on its side, and you can see there's even a little bit of a curvature there, because if you have your finger totally flat, you actually, naturally have certain portions that are closer to the actual strings and some parts that are not quite as close, just because of the way fingers are usually shaped. So if you have it on its side, rotated like this, you can see that I'm covering all of the strings equally. So I hope this lesson helped you out and set you on the right path to mastering your bar chords. And just remember, like going to the gym and strength training, you won't build that strength overnight, but the more you practice, the more you inevitably will build that strength. Just keep at it, hang in there, and it'll come eventually. Let me know down in the comments below what your struggles with bar chords are, and if you have any tips that I missed in this video, I would love to know. Thanks so much.